Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1000 to 2000 elo in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. And today, my opponent plays e5 against e4, so of course we're going to go straight into the Vienna. And there's many options for black here. Black can play bishop c5, black can play knight c6, black can play knight to f6. There's also a couple other moves, but knight to f6 allows the Vienna Gambit with pawn to f4. If you want to learn how to play the Vienna Gambit yourself, make sure you check out my full Vienna Gambit course video on my channel. Should be easy enough to find via my channel page or via the YouTube search. And I do think that is a very good video, a great introduction to the Vienna. It's a very complicated opening, there's a lot that goes on, but hopefully today I can show you how to handle it against d6, which is definitely not one of the most common moves, but it's declining the gambit. And you may be tempted to take here, but a general rule of thumb in the Vienna Gambit is if black doesn't take you, you do not take black. Most of the time, that is the rule of thumb. The reason being, if you take here, black will take back, and black's bishops are ready to develop, the knight is going to come out, the queen controls the d-file, black is ready to castle. It's a really, really good position for the black pieces, so we don't want to allow that. My opponent goes bishop to g4. You can play pawn to h3 in this position, which forces black to take, because if black retreats to h5, one of the great parts about the Vienna Gambit is after g4, bishop g6, your pawn is on f4, so f5 would trap the bishop. However, personally, I don't feel the need to go for these lines straight away. I prefer playing bishop to c4. Reason being, and we might get it in this game, is knight c6 is the most common move in this position, the most natural looking move of course, trying to play knight to d4 to apply further pressure to my knight. Now on knight c6 I like to play the move d3, and on knight d4 we have some very interesting traps which I like to go for, and I'm not actually sure whether it works quite in this position or not, but oh my god, I can't talk. Interestingly, my opponent actually just takes the knight voluntarily, so we don't even have to waste a move with h3. If I remember, I will tell you about some of those traps, and I believe I do actually cover some of those lines in my Vienna Gambit course anyway, so if you want to learn more about that, I might remember at the end of the video in the analysis, but it is definitely in that course. Okay, my opponent goes c6. And I assume he is trying to play the move d5. And controlling the d5 square is one of the big ideas of the Vienna, right? Especially when the gambit doesn't get accepted, it's one of the big ideas. So we control it with our e4 pawn, our bishop on c4, our knight on c3, and our queen on f3. So the square is controlled 4 times, meaning black needs 4 defenders as well. He has 1, 2, 3. He does not have 4. Which means d5 cannot be played. However, if black were to take on f4 and our queen took back, then black could play the move d5 because our queen would no longer be defending it. So how should we deal with that? Of course, we should play the move d3, meaning that if he takes, we can take with the bishop instead, meaning our queen maintains control of the d5 square. And my opponent goes b5, which is a very ambitious move. I assume he's trying to play b4, kicking our knight out, and then playing the move d5. Okay, he could do it this way as well. Of course, a4 is a threat to trap our bishop. And how are we going to deal with that? Either we play a3 or we play a4. Now, which is the correct answer? Okay, well, if b4 is played, we can take and win the rook. So b4 can't be played. If a4 could be played, we would drop our bishop back to a2. Again, b4, we take the pawn and we just go up a clean pawn. We also maintain our control over d5. If a4 takes, we can probably meet with rook takes because my opponent doesn't have a light squared bishop to target the rook. And we apply some good pressure. We could even take with the bishop on a4 take and pin the pawn to the king, meaning that it doesn't support the d5 square. My issue, however, is a4, b4, kicking my knight away. And then after takes, maybe black can try and play the move d5. d5 can't be played straight away, of course, because we will take on e5, the d6 pawn used to defend the e5 square. However, on a4, b4, knight to e2, by the way, I'm talking you through this because this is how I calculate. Obviously, I would do it quicker than the way that I'm explaining, but like, this is how you calculate at a high level of chess, which I would consider myself to be. If my opponent takes, I don't have to take with the bishop. I could take with the knight, meaning that on d5, I would still have 4 defenders of the d5 square, so you can't play d5. Alternatively, after pawn f4, I could play bishop f4, and on d5, I could consider the move e5, or even bishop to g5, pinning the knight, which isn't a bad option. It's not a bad option. And a4 is a little bit more forcing. I feel like that's the more aggressive approach, to try and reroute our knight to the king side and start some kind of attack. And to be honest, I think I prefer that. Because if black continues with all of these ideas and like taking and going d5, he can probably execute d5. Unless I take here with the knight, of course, but I might take with the bishop. He could execute d5, however, he will be so far behind in development. I mean, we have 3 pieces out already. We're about to castle kingside. Our bishop is ready to get out. We have the bishop pair, bear in mind. d5 would open up the position, which typically favours the side with the bishops. Also, f5 is a very, very weak square that our white... Oh my god. Our knight has a clear line to get into f5. Typically, this would be controlled by a bishop, and if the knight got to f5 and the bishop takes and the pawn takes, that would not be good for us. However, here the bishop is gone. The bishop voluntarily traded itself off on the f3 square, so our knight does have access to f5, which is a very nice square. My opponent goes bishop to e7, prioritizing his development, which is probably a good idea. We could also consider the move f5, which is often an idea in these lines. However, because black doesn't have a light-squared bishop to come to e6 to counter my bishop, I don't think that's really necessary. Maybe he can get a knight to the c5 square to target my bishop, but we can probably put it on c4 or retreat it to a2 and be perfectly fine. My opponent castles. And now, okay, we can move our king to h1, preempting a check on c5 or b6, but I don't think that's necessary. We could always meet that with bishop e3 if we want, or just moving our king to h1. What else could we do? We could go queen to g3, a very common idea in this kind of system, applying more pressure to the e5 square. And if a move like knight to d7 defending, we could potentially push f5 then and try and play bishop h6 ideas. However, this knight could always come, like even on queen g3 immediately, this knight could potentially come to h5 and try and trade some things off. So we do have to be a little bit careful. And there are ways that that can be a repetition as well, like queen g3, knight h5, queen g4, knight f6 attacking the queen. Queen drops back, knight h5 again attacking the queen. We, of course, don't want a repetition here. I think we are definitely better. Therefore, I'm leaning more towards the move knight to f5, because I don't see how black stops knight g3, because I don't see how black stops knight to f5. If he plays a move like g6, then f5 will be incredibly powerful going after the g6 pawn, especially considering the f7 pawn is pinned to the king. So, for all of those reasons, I'm going to play knight g6. And I hope that the way that I'm explaining my moves here is very obvious and easy to follow. So if you are enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it. And now, this is kind of one of those positions where I'm sure we've got an advantage. We have the bishop pair, we have superior control of the center. Again, you know, black could probably take here and try and play the move d5, and he can probably do it, but I just don't think that it is a good idea in his current situation, because he is behind in development. Now he's pretty much level in development, if not a tiny bit ahead. But this bishop doesn't need to move from c1 just yet. I don't need to bring this rook over yet. The bishop still has excellent scope without having to move from its starting square. Knight f5 looks like a very tempting move, and I don't really see a reason not to play it. If my opponent... maybe you can go g6? No, but then we have knight to h6 check, king g7, and pawn to f5, with the knight being defended by the bishop. Like I said, the bishop is perfectly good on the c1 square for the time being. It doesn't need to come to e3 for no particular reason. It's fine where it is. So knight f5 looks very nice. It looks difficult for black to kick out. We also have queen g3 with mating threats. Of course, knight h5 would attack and defend, but queen g4 would be a lot more powerful in that scenario, because the knight can't drop back attacking my queen, because we would have mate on g7. So I'm going to play the move knight to f5. Of course, if takes, we will take with a bishop. Maybe my opponent plans to play the move knight to e5 in that line. Trying to rotate to g6 potentially to block the g file up. However, if take knight here, I think we maybe have queen g3. Threatening mate and threatening the knight. Knight h5 can't be played. Or can it be played? Because we don't have queen g4 because the knight defends that square. That's interesting. I'll have to think about that when it comes to it. Take, knight e5. No, actually. We could just take. And after takes queen g3, we threaten the pawn and we threaten mate. And there is no queen to d4 check defending the e5 pawn with tempo because our knight controls the e5 square. Sorry, the d4 square. I know that, again, is very complicated, but hopefully my explanation makes sense. And this is just a ridiculously powerful knight. I mean, this is often an idea in, like, Italian or Roy Lopez games, where if the white knight can get to the f5 square, or, as a counterpart, the black knight can get to the f4 square, they can be very, very powerful. But typically, you will trade off your bishop for this knight. Like, for example, if this knight was actually a light squared bishop, black would immediately snap the knight off and probably be better because, or at least equal. c6 might hang in some of those lines, just because it's that important to get rid of the knight on f5. But now it is very difficult, and the knight is applying pressure not only to g7, but the dark squared bishop and the d6 pawn. And my opponent is taking his time to think, because this is problematic. This is problematic. I mean, of course, it looks like my knight has moved a lot of times, and it has. It's moved 4 times in a total of 13 moves. I've invested, like, 25% of my moves into just moving my knight around, but it's perfectly justified. Oh, we could get something really cool here. Queen g3 is, of course, the move you should consider, going after g7. I don't understand how h6 helps my opponent. I don't really know what that does. It's a bit confusing. Queen g3, knight to h5. Can you see the move that I want to play in that position? I think it's a really cool move. Queen g6. The f pawn is pinned to the king, and the h7 pawn no longer defends g6. I'm attacking the knight, threatening mate, and also threatening knight to h6 check, which looks pretty powerful. I'm not really sure how black stops this. If you play g6, I just take it because the pawn is pinned to the king. Also, h6 hangs, but that's less important. Queen g3. This should be completely winning. And I mean, my opponent hasn't fallen for any kind of opening trap here, right? This is simply the Vienna being incredibly powerful and incredibly potent at attacking. I think the pawn on f4 does a lot for the position because it made it impossible for, well, not impossible, but very difficult for black to strike back in the center, which meant my bishop never got shut off, which is a very important reason that this attack works. Without my bishop, say my bishop is on, I don't even know, like b1, the attack wouldn't really work, right? So hopefully, you know, my opponent is a 1750 rated player. He's not a bad player whatsoever. This should show you how powerful the Vienna is. So, okay. I think queen g6 is the move. Queen g4 is probably also good, but I think my opponent is intending to play knight d2 f6 in that position, attacking and defending and maintaining defense of g7. On queen g6, knight d2 f6 defending the knight. There I can play knight takes h6 check, the king moves, and then I can play knight takes f7 check, and my opponent will have to give up his rook and will be up like 2 pawns and an exchange. There may even be a way to mate there, but I don't really feel the need to calculate it. Queen g6 looks like it's completely winning. A pretty gangster move, to be fair. A pretty gangster move, of course. It's obviously a pin, but I have a feeling my opponent only calculated queen g4. And the important difference with queen g4 is that knight to f6 comes with tempo, meaning that knight takes h6 check doesn't really work, and king h7 is probably winning. Although there could be a case to be made for queen to f5 check, king h6, pawn takes with discovered check, but that's not relevant right now. This is actually, my queen looks awesome on the g6 square, completely surrounded by pieces, but it can't be taken. Okay. We could start with this, to be fair, because if rook takes, knight takes h6 check, the king can't go to f8 because of mate. So the king would have to still go to the corner. Oh, wait, is that more powerful? Although, bishop takes f7 if the king immediately runs to the corner. Maybe we have pawn takes e5, threatening bishop takes h6. It's interesting. Because, yeah, if bishop takes, rook takes, the game is over after knight takes h6, because I'll either mate my opponent or win his queen. If the king goes to h8, then knight takes, you know, with the rook being there already, the queen falls. If we start with this, and then knight takes, rook takes, I don't know. I don't know if it actually makes a difference, but I think I prefer to start with this check. I don't think I'm missing anything here. Let's play it. Bishop takes f7 check. The rook can take, but we will play knight takes h6 check, and the game will be wrapped up, essentially. So the king has to go to the h8 square. But then we will take on e5, I think. I think we should take on e5. Opening up our bishop. Also opening up our rook, which could be useful. However, our rook can only really see the f6 square if this knight moves, and that knight is defended like a billion times, so that's not all that useful. Take, take, take. There is no queen here check because our knight defends that square, which is just worth noting. Take. You have to take back. There's no other option. No other option. Pawn takes, bishop takes. If black allows this, then after knight takes, we just take because we control that square too many times. So let's do this. And if pawn takes pawn, bishop takes h6, pawn takes h6, queen takes h6, knight has to block here, 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 knight has to block. I think we have to take the knight on h5. Probably with the bishop. Is there anything else we can do? I don't think so. I think we should take here. Is it better to take with a knight? I don't think so, because we don't actually have a threat then. So we should probably take with the bishop. Let's take bishop h6. This has been a really, really cool attacking game here. And my queen can't be touched because none of these pieces can see my queen, right? This knight can't see my queen because it's on a dark square. And it would have to do some weird maneuvering to be able to. Okay, my opponent delivers a check. We can just move our king. That doesn't really help anything. And this is the only piece that can move to see my queen with knight to f5. Sorry, knight to f4. But, I mean, not only would that hang mate, but we can just snap the knight off. Okay. I didn't consider that. That's a fair point. It still should be completely winning, but yeah, I did miss that, admittedly. Yeah, my queen's a bit overloaded there. Fair enough. But I don't think it really matters. Because we should have many pawns and too big of an attack. We have to take, right? There's no other option. If I take here, then rook takes. Knight takes, rook takes f6. That's worth considering, actually. Of course, if bishop takes, knight takes, I can take here. I could take with the knight. If rook takes, bishop takes, knight takes, I take on f6. That should be winning, because we double the rooks on the f-file. Knight takes here. I do carry the threat of winning this knight. If knight takes, I'm not so sure then. So maybe it's easier to take here and go for pawn takes h6, knight takes h6. With a lot of pressure on this knight. I think this is the easier thing to go for, so I'm going to do it. Yeah, fair play to my opponent. I missed the fact that my queen was overloaded there, but this very well may be still the best line. And my opponent throws in bishop c5 check, because otherwise, after pawn takes, the bishop would be hanging on e7. So, yeah, good find, good find. Maybe pawn to d4 was actually the more accurate move because of that, but yeah, I don't think it matters too much. Probably, I don't really see a reason not to take on h6, so let's do it. These knights are kind of tripping over each other, which is pretty useful. I do actually have to be a little bit careful about, like, checks here and the queen getting to h4, because our king is cut off on the g1 square. I do have to be aware of that, but I don't think it's an immediate threat. Particularly, you know, a move like knight g4, knight g4, knight g3, you know, I don't think it's really a problem. Rook a7 is an creative move. It's a cool move. Trying to go to h7. That's actually a bit concerning. However, we do have knight to f7, so queen g6 looks pretty nice. Queen g6, if knight to f4, we deliver this check, and my opponent has to sacrifice the rook, and that should be fine. This does look a little bit scary, to be fair, but it should be fine. We could maybe even sacrifice back the exchange there. What else do we have? I don't think we really have anything else. Queen e6 can be considered. Trying to attack e5. Queen e6 might be more accurate, actually. Although we give our opponent the h7 square for the king, not sure if I like that. With the queen on g6, my opponent has no other alternatives. If queen g8 though, oh no, that hangs a queen. That's fine. Okay, let's go queen g6. Let's go queen g6. Queen e7 might be played. Defending here, but then oh no, we don't have mate. because the knight defends that square. I'm basically just trying to put my queen on a square that creates the most threats possible, pretty much. And we only have 2 minutes 30 left, so I have to be a bit quick here. Yeah, my opponent has defended this very well, to be fair to him. I probably could have been a little bit more accurate, but I think we should be okay. I mean, if we had an extra move here, obviously we would play knight to f7, but let's say that wasn't on the cards. We could prepare to double our rooks up, and if that happens, the game is probably over. There's probably scenarios where the knight coming in here, we can just sacrifice the rook for the knight if some tactics work out in our favour as well. Not here, of course, but worth mentioning. How does black defend this? Queen e7 looks decent. Knight to f5? Wait, queen e7. Rook f6. The queen can't take because we mate on g8, so knight takes. Is that useful? I don't think so. We don't gain access to any new squares. We could bring our other rook in, but black probably just offers a queen trade. Maybe we can take here and just be up a couple pawns. Well, 3 pawns, actually. Yeah, we do have 3 pawns for our troubles, which could be quite important in allowing us to trade down to some winning endgames. However, here, queen f7 looks pretty good. We don't really have a threat there. Check. Queen h7. Yeah, he does go queen e7. Oh, okay. We could go rook to f5, threatening the knight and preparing to double up. That's a good option. Also looking at the e5 pawn, which could be useful. Rook f5. We could consider the move g4. That looks a bit mental, but although maybe he just goes knight to f4, blocking our rook's vision, so that's probably no good. Rook f5. We're threatening the knight. Queen g7. Not sure how we deal with that. Maybe we have to trade queens and just win e5. Here. I'm not sure we have an option, to be fair. I don't think I'm blundering anything necessarily, and the endgame should probably be winning, but I would just like it to be more winning, ideally. Queen g7, my queen doesn't really have a way out. I'm not sure if I'm getting my knight trapped. No, it should be fine. Queen g7. If queen g7, king g7, rook e5, the bishop hangs. So if king takes knight, rook takes bishop. And if the bishop moves, then we have checks on f5, saving the knight with tempo. So our rook can't hang in any of those lines, which is very useful. Yeah, okay. He does go for this. I don't think we have a better option than trading. I mean, check. He just takes it, so we don't gain anything. If here, then knight takes, we have no threat. So I think we have to go for this. This is not particularly comfortable. Although this should be our saving grace. Rook e5. Worst case scenario, we would have had to do this and be down a piece and up maybe 4 pawns. No, now, wait, are we up 4 pawns right now? We might be up 5? Okay, we'll win this. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pawns. My opponent has 3. So we're up 4 pawns. That's another pawn. And that's a really important pawn because we can throw the A pawn down the board. That should be very useful. The knights don't quite have enough firepower to trouble my king either. You know, a check on f2, I just move my king, and you have nothing. Let's move the rook to b5 to monitor both of these pawns. And then I'm just going to throw the a pawn down the board and basically say these knights are a bit slow and a bit clumsy, which they kind of are. Okay, it's a move. We could probably start with pawn e5. Knight g4. Pawn d4 looks pretty good. Just forcing some more pawns through. I could take here, and after this, takes. Black has 0 pawns remaining. Rook c2, I just push. I could even consider this, threatening this, but I mean, the king just moves, so what am I doing? I think I like this. I think I like this. The more pawns rolling, the better, surely. And takes shouldn't work. Because after takes, if you take, I can always block on c1. And black's knight, I don't think can get involved quickly enough. Let's push. Again, I don't think these knights have enough firepower. If knight f2, king g1, your knight's under attack, you have no way of delivering another check. And we have 3 pawns up the board, ready to go. Obviously, I've got these 2 as well, but like they're more so just to defend my king. Okay, he goes after c2, applying pressure to g2. c3 looks like the move. Because, of course, I don't want to allow either of these pawns through. That'll be a bit disastrous. However, on a trade, the knight has no way of attacking the pawn because we control both of these squares and we control the open b file. So he pushes. How do we go about this? a5 looks good. I don't think it matters too much. I know my opponent can go knight f4 and go after the g2 pawn, but I don't care. I don't care if he wins the g2 pawn. He has no way of actually attacking me. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. We can just push. Rook a7, rook b7. My opponent has no way of accessing the... Well, he can actually go to d3 to access the b2 pawn. That's a lie. However, my rook is behind the b pawn, so that should be fine. Something like if he tries to go all in for the counterplay and trying to push, I don't think it works because we just push the e pawn and the d pawn. And even if this knight gets out and the pawn pushes, my rook is watching it the whole way. I'd even sacrifice the rook for the pawn if I had to get one of the other pawns promoted. Okay, he's really going in for the counterplay, but I mean, there is just nothing. There shouldn't be anything. Unless, like, rook takes and knight g4 is the idea, going for h2. But we can probably just go g3 and get rid of everything. If the rook can't get to g2, there should be nothing. The knight can come to h3, trying to come to f2, but we just go king g1. And again, there is nothing. Okay. And then we push. And the rook should sacrifice itself for the pawn. Unless he wants, okay, knight here, I suppose. Can we go this? That might be more accurate. Because a rook trade should be completely winning. Well, no, then he repeats. So yeah, let's take. And the knight is tied down to this pawn. It can't do anything. And I think we probably bring the king. Our rook can always, you know, access a square like a6. The knight can't move. That knight isn't going anywhere useful. It can't attack b2 properly unless it somehow gets to d3, but it can't really accomplish that. So let's bring the king. Even if these pieces were taken off the board, this is probably still winning. Probably, but with the inclusion of them, it's even more winning. Give a check, right? Make the king move. Rook a5 looks good. Attacking the knight. Because of the geometry of my king to the knight, I talk about this a lot, like this diagonal with one square between. The knight just can't target my king. It's just not possible. It would take many moves to do that. Okay, knight goes to b6. Yeah, let's push with check. And then go pawn d5. The knights just can't stop everything. They can't. Even if I sacked a rook for a knight, they still probably couldn't. Let's push this pawn. Knight c7 should be forced, because otherwise I promote. I think on knight c7 I can promote this pawn. And after knight takes, I can take with the rook. And after knight takes, I can promote with check and pick up the knight. That should be the cleanest win. And then rook takes. And then probably a resignation. Of course, there's a million ways to win this endgame, but this seems like the easiest and the quickest. Or, yeah, you could do that, I suppose. And my rook will cut the e-file off, and this king can't do anything. It can't access any of my queenside pawns. I mean, even if it could, I could obviously just defend, but you can see there's like a force field here. The king can't get in, so I can just push these pawns and win the game. So, a bit confused as to why my opponent hasn't resigned yet. If you give me a second, I think... Okay, he's abandoned the game, cool. So yeah, a really interesting game, and I feel like maybe bishop h6 was the mistake that made the attack a bit less effective than it probably could have been, but overall, pretty happy with that. Hopefully it encourages those of you who don't play the Vienna to try the Vienna out. Again, I've got a big course on my channel, which I highly recommend for that, as well as my Vienna playlist linked down below with all of my Vienna games. But before you go and watch those videos, let's dive into the analysis and see what the computer has to say. Okay, I was just looking through the game, and there's quite a few things that I missed, so I guarantee some of you saw them, but a wild game, and some of the tactics that weren't played, they're going to be really interesting. So, Vienna, f4, Vienna Gambit, d6, it's a fine line, it's a little bit passive though, knight f3, applying pressure to the center, bishop g4 pinning, and there's many moves you can play here. Like I said, you can start with the move h3 and go for this, and then maybe something like knight to c6, trying to come in, computer wants bishop b5, because you can't really allow this. And this is fine, but to me it feels like less in the spirit of the Vienna, so personally I don't go for it. I prefer this sort of line. And, oh yes, I do remember now. I thought I might forget. But there's ideas, like after knight c6 castles, something like knight to d4. For example, black can fall into a trap after this, bishop takes f7. If king takes, then knight e5 check, king moves, knight g4, queen g4, and you can't take here because of mate on e6. So there's a lot of like trappy lines with the knight coming to to d4 and the bishop coming to g4. And you don't have to play those, it's just good to be aware of them. My opponent takes unprovoked though, which was very strange to be honest. c6, clearly trying to play the move d5, but trading off your bishop like that and then trying to go c6, d5 is a bit of a strange plan. Here, try and find the best move for white. If you find this move, then like, I don't know, you should be a grandmaster. It's ridiculous. It's g4. g4. And this is, I think, this is kind of playing on some other ideas in the Vienna Gambit. So let's say black plays a move like knight b to d7. You have g5. The black knight cannot advance, so it has to go back to g8. And I mean, white's position is dominant here. The reason I say this is similar to some other lines in the Vienna is because on move 3 of the Vienna Gambit, if the gambit is accepted, then pawn to e5, the knight can't advance, so the knight has to retreat to g8. It's the same kind of concept, but the computer wants to use the g pawn to accomplish that goal. Very interesting. I, of course, did not see this, and I instead played the move d3, which is a very good move. That's perfectly fine. b5, we drop the bishop back. a5, and here, I, of course, said that the two moves, of course, you could take on e5, but I see no need. The two moves I'm considering are a4 and a3. I chose to move a4. I'm not a computer. Which one would you choose? You can rewind to the part of the video where I talk about that if you want to see my reasoning, but this is the kind of positional chess that can be quite important to understand, because it is positional in nature. So the computer prefers to move a4 by a non-insignificant margin. Now, what's wrong with a3? There's nothing necessarily wrong with a3. I mean, I assumed black might go for something like this, and b4 can't be played anyway. However, I don't know, b4 is going to come at some point in the future. Maybe c5, b4 could be annoying later on. And I don't know, I kind of liked the idea of rotating my knight anyway, to be honest. So a4 is the best move. And the computer prefers to take, which is typically a terrible idea. But the point is that allowing my knight to rotate is actually really bad, because b4 forces my knight to rotate, and d5, of course, I will take on e5. I thought my opponent might take on f4, and then try and play d5. However, now, and you can take with the knight here, by the way, to maintain the grip on the d5 square, but I wanted to take with the bishop, which is actually the better move. And if d5 in this position, I could take, but I could also queenside castle. g4 is a move. I did consider bishop g5, but I didn't think it was all that impressive after a move like bishop to e7. But white is developed so well, and black has one piece out, and he's throwing pawns into the center, opening up the game. That's not how you play when you're so far behind in development. And my opponent didn't do that. He played principled chess, bishop e7. Computer here wants bishop to e3. I said the bishop was perfectly fine on the c1 square, but I think it wants to castle queenside. Yeah, that's why. Which normally doesn't happen in the Vienna, but you can see how quickly white's attack could happen in an opposite side castling position. And because the pawns on the queen side are already locked together, black would really struggle to counterattack, especially because of white's control over the d5 square. This is really only going one way. So an interesting idea from the computer. However, I chose to castle kingside. My opponent castles kingside. I go knight to g3, looking at the f5 square. g6, like I said, I didn't think that was a very good move. And I was thinking about the move f5, which the computer says king g7 and black is okay, because taking is bad. fg6, the f-file opens, black is fine. The better move here is actually fe5. And after de5, bishop h6, rook to e8. What? Knight f5? And if takes, then knight g4. rook f5, and we're just probably mating or winning a bunch of material. That's pretty insane. My opponent, however, went knight bd7. I went knight to f5. And yeah, h6 just was not it. Not a good move. A move like king h8 makes more sense, unpinning the pawn. Well, unpinning this pawn and unpinning this pawn if I put my queen on the g-file. Knight to e8 also makes sense. Trying to rotate this knight to f6 and have this knight defending g7. Maybe the bishop to f6 makes sense. Although it is obviously very ugly. But yeah, I also thought maybe black can take, which the computer does think is viable. And I was thinking knight to e5 is an idea here. And the best move here is queen to h3. I was considering this line. Although there is this, and it isn't actually that good a position. But, you know, I wasn't necessarily going to play that. I just thought it was an idea. My opponent, though, goes h6, which effectively throws the game away. Queen g3, and I could see my opponent was planning queen g4, knight d to f6, and if queen g6 doesn't exist, let's say it doesn't exist, and I go for something like this is still completely winning, and I actually saw this exact idea in the game with f takes e5 check. So the king would have to retreat or play the move g6, and yeah, this is pretty wild to be fair. But yeah, we have queen g6, and this is the problem with the move h6. Not only is that a target, but it also takes the eyes off of g6 because the f pawn is not defending g6. Knight goes to f6, and do you think knight h6 is better, or bishop f7 is better, or even fe5, opening up the bishop to h6? Which move would you play here? I chose bishop f7 because rook takes f7 can't be played because of this combination. That was not the best. fe5 is also playable. The best is actually knight to h6, and you just win the exchange by force. And I saw this, but I thought I could go for more. Realistically, being up 2 pawns and an exchange, you can't get all that much better than that, to be fair. So yeah, I went for bishop takes f7, and I mean, the game is still completely winning, of course. The king has to go to h8. So yeah, in this position, I did find the best move, fe5. g4 was also an option, which I didn't consider. But fe5, de5, and believe it or not, bishop takes bishop takes h6 is actually the best move. Now, I was expecting this, knight here, and then I can take on h5. I think I was going to take with the queen, and this is what I was calculating. I completely missed the fact the rook could take, well, my opponent delivers a check first, because if here, I mean, you can still deliver the check afterwards, but the bishop is hanging is the point. Bishop gives the check, king moves, rook f7. I was trying to calculate some ideas here, but I couldn't really make anything concrete work. Now, after this, I do have rook f6, but there is in this position queen g8. Don't know if my opponent would have found it. Maybe this is a relatively easy win. I'm still down 2 pieces for a rook and up 3 pawns. About to be a 4th, so I'm still completely winning, but yeah, okay. I chose to take on f7, which is the better option. My opponent plays g takes h6, and here I took on h6 with the knight, which is not the best move. Try and find the best move for white. This is quite instructive. Try and find it. Knight h4. A quiet move, but the king has no squares, and the knight is threatening to come to g6. And if you try to defend, then I just take here, and this is still mate. The only way you can defend is with the queen, but then you have to give up your queen. The best move for black is knight g7. If I give this check, the king has the h7 square. f6 does hang, though. But I also don't have to do that. I can just take f6 immediately. I missed this idea. Really, really cute idea from the computer there. I take on h6. My opponent goes rook a7. And I back the queen out. But I didn't have to do that. Again, find the best move for white. Queen a7. If takes, knight f7. And yeah, this is obviously completely winning. I have 2 rooks for a bishop and a knight, and I'm up like 3 pawns. That's completely game over. This knight is not getting trapped ever. I don't think. No, it's not getting trapped. Even if it does get trapped, it's completely winning. But yeah, I completely missed that idea. I went queen g6, and I'm still winning. Queen to e7. Here, I found the best move. I didn't play it. I saw it. I was like, okay, you can't take with a queen because of mate. And if knight f6, rook f1, I don't know how black defends himself. I don't know why I didn't go for this. I just didn't trust myself. The threat is obvious. The best move here is b3. And this is black's best continuation. Although this looks like a tiny bit scary. What's the idea? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. A little bit scary though. Realistically, b3 probably wouldn't be played. Queen g7 probably would be played, but yeah, you can't defend. I don't know why I didn't go for that. I went rook f5. I'm still winning. Queen g7 is really the only move. Otherwise, I'm going to double up. So queen g7. And I have to trade queens. If rook takes here, apparently the move is g4. Oh, okay, yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, the knights are just falling over each other, essentially. But the king takes on g7. Crucially, I have this move, rook e5. If the bishop tries to move, then I have knight to f5 check, and the game is over. So my opponent goes king takes knight, rook takes c5. Here, the issue for black is that he went rook c7 and gave me the a5 pawn. He doesn't really have many options, though. Rook a6 can defend both pawns, but I bring this rook into the game. And these knights can't do anything. Like, knight d7, rook f5, c5, g4, knight g7. I mean, I suppose you can maybe try to play this, but this looks pretty impossible. This rook is tied down. The knights can't really go anywhere. So he tries to go for the more active approach, which I think was probably the best option. I don't necessarily play this perfectly, but I didn't see any danger to my king, and I thought that I can just lob the pawns down the board, and there's very little my opponent can do about it. In this position, I considered the move a7, of course. I was a little bit... I probably shouldn't have been, because I can, of course, promote to a queen. I just didn't want to allow any shenanigans with this, although I suppose I always can just run the king and I'm perfectly safe. I just didn't want to get perpetualed in any possible way. So I played g3, just eliminating the danger. I was expecting knight to h3, but of course, there is no threat. If here, then here. If you go back... Oh, is that actually a perpetual? Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, no, that's a perpetual check. So I do actually have to be a little bit careful. I'd have to play rook f1. or rook b6, king g5, rook f6, taking away the f2 square. Yeah, okay. That's really interesting. I hope I would have seen that. Can I not also just do this? Oh, no, sorry, it's my opponent's turn. What am I on about? No, yeah, I have to either sack my rook or find this maneuver. That's nuts. Fortunately, my opponent didn't go for it. He probably should have. a7, knight c7, rook pin, get the trade, bring the king. The knights just can't do anything. I don't think there was a much quicker path to victory than what we went for. Whoops. I was quite happy with this idea of promoting and sacking the rook. Of course, if takes, I promote. So my opponent plays on for some reason and abandons the game in this position. A really interesting Vienna game. Vienna Gambit game. Some stuff that I've never really seen. Like, taking on f3 unprovoked like that is very rare. And this whole queenside expansion thing just didn't really work. A really interesting attack. Messed it up a little bit, but the endgame was fortunately still winning, and I think we navigated that very well. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you want to see my full Vienna course, check out the video up here to learn the Vienna for yourself. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the... Oh my god. Check out the playlist down there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.